good evening and welcome to the Havas Switched Oncology Healthcare Leaders Focus Group, and thank you very much for everyone for attending this evening. A little bit about this programme. This is the third focus group that we're holding, and it's specifically trying to bring people who are leaders in healthcare or the science around it. And we're going to be discussing today about some of the revolutions that are happening in oncology, but more importantly, the challenges that we have in communicating that, both to the profession, to patients, and to the wider public. We are at the cusp of a revolution in oncology, in prevention, in diagnosis and in treatment, in molecular oncology, genomics, immunotherapy, and beyond. And these are transforming our knowledge and our expertise. Science is shifting, perceptions are changing, but this isn't the final frontier. To make a difference to the millions of people who face cancer every single day and to make the solutions equitable, we need to reposition the questions, challenge accepted certainties, and personalise solutions. So we've brought together today some experts which cover a range of the healthcare expertise that are needed really to make this revolution happen. They will introduce themselves, but we have very fortunately got folk from the world of oncology itself who practice it, those who try to get the message of breakthroughs in oncology, to discuss how the communications need to change, and also, sort of slightly tangentially, some people from the world of mathematics who may be able to sort of shed some light into the changing way in which computational biology and machine learning can also help us both understand and fight this very great grand challenge that we face. So without further ado, I would first of all like to invite our panellists to give a little bit of an introduction to themselves, and then we shall crack on with some questions. Stephanie.
I'm Stephanie. I'm a senior surgical fellow at the Royal Marsden. My training was in obstetrics and gynecology with an MD in oncology. My research focused on survivorship in women who've been treated for cervical and endometrial cancers. My interests are in the future of medicine and oncology, and really how we get information across that makes the patient more empowered to make decisions for themselves.
I'm Andy Gaya. I'm a consultant clinical oncologist at Gaya's and St Thomas's hospitals. I treat mainly gastrointestinal cancers with chemotherapy, radiotherapy. I'm involved in kind of latest radiotherapy techniques such as stereotactic radiotherapy, hoping to be one of the first to get cracking with the proton therapy when it goes live in the UK later this year. I have an interest really in early adoption of novel approaches into cancer treatment for patients and integration, because that's how we're going to really make a difference, integrating all the various treatment modalities together, not necessarily all at the same time, and sort of taking other aspects of care like diet and exercise as well into patient care, and hoping to improve outcomes that way. That's sort of my main interest.
Vernon.
Hi, so I'm Vernon Bainton, Chief Medical Officer for the Havas Lynx Group. I was a medic that worked in the NHS for a little while in medicine and anaesthetics before I started to move away and went into industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, in oncology, mental health, and from there went rogue into the communications world. So, so for the last 13 or so years, been applying contemporary communications, approaches, channels, styles, UX, design, whatever it might be. How do we apply that to healthcare communications? How do we get better outcomes? How do we give information that makes it more relevant to the right people at the right time?
Holly.
So hi, I'm Holly Dempsey. I'm a dietitian and I'm the professional lead for the cancer rehab service in Berkshire. I used to work in renal failure and ICU, but had quite a few friends and family affected by cancer, and it was kind of the aftermath of the cancer that people were really struggling with. And I moved to Berkshire, and the cancer rehab service was set up. So it kind of the survivorship stages, people living with and beyond cancer, which is my area of specialty really. We work as a big MDT, mainly nurses and allied health professionals, to get people, looking partly at, preventing future problems, but also kind of managing the effects of cancer, both physically and psychologically, and helping people move forward.
Ben.
I'm Ben Harmon-Jones. I'm a medical doctor. In my training, I spent a lot of time in Manchester working with the genomics department there with next generation sequencing. I then, after qualification and spending a bit of time in practice, I moved into the healthcare communications industry. I've worked with oncology companies in developing communications that are meaningful to multiple different stakeholders. I still practice. I spend about half my time in psychiatry. I work with patients who have got physical health problems and also have mental health problems that they've developed alongside their physical conditions. My passion is really for making sure that people's mental health is looked after as well as their physical health is.
Thank you very much, Ben. And last but not least, Shamil.
I'm Shamil Chandaria. I work in artificial intelligence at Google DeepMind, focus on machine learning, but also computational biology, computational neuroscience. Been very interested in looking at metabolism, computational models of metabolism. Also worked with Jack on various metrics around the pace of aging and longevity. The application of data and mathematical structure to the biological arena is very important.
So the first question that we have is directed, I think, mostly towards those people who are working day to day with patients, but possibly beyond. What inspired you to get into a career of oncology, Andy?
If I told you the truth, it would be a little bit disappointing, actually. It's just kind of, I mean, a lot in medicine. A lot of it is about being in the right place at the right time, and who you happen to come into contact with, and who inspires you, and what the opportunities happen to be, and what positions become available at any particular time. And so, the fact of the matter is that was a lot to do with it. But I did an intercalated Bachelor of Science degree in biomedical science at UCL. And I just found the oncology was absolutely fascinating to me. And this is going back a little while, not too long, not that old, but going back a little while now. And really what struck me about oncology was it's right at the forefront of medical technology development, drug development. It really is sort of pushing the boundaries in every way. It's multidisciplinary. Dietitians, physiotherapists, nurses, nurse specialists, I mean, everybody's involved. A lot of integration with surgeons as well. I work with surgeons on a daily basis. And it's multi-system. So I'm not just dealing with hearts or kidneys or chests. It's the whole patient. It's very holistic. So that's really what took me. And just the whole concept of working at the forefront in a rapidly developing, rapidly changing specialty. It's very challenging, keeping up to date.
Holly, how did you end up with oncology as your special interest?
Probably a little bit closer to home. Like I said, I was already working in renal failure in an ICU, and my uncle got cancer, got bone cancer, and that metastasised to his lungs. And then his wife also got breast cancer as well. And like I said before, the treatment was great. It was all supported. He got, everything got done in the NHS. They got all their treatment and everything. And then suddenly you get to the point of where they're cured or living with it, whichever what is happening, and the support goes. And they both kind of fell apart, and they were not, in their words, the people they used to be. And so we always say, in the rehab side of things, it's kind of finding your new normal. So it's, but they didn't have that support. There's a lot more support up there where they live now that is going on. But I just thought there's so much more we can do post-treatment for those living with and beyond. And that's kind of how I ended up there.
In our previous focus group, which was very much on caregivers, there was this concept that perhaps caregivers will one day become a really kind of like a formal, necessary part to be able to scale care for cancer in the form of, really medically literate advocates. Are you seeing more of that evolving, or do you see still there as being very much one side of the fence that delivers care and the others that just kind of wing it as the patients and the caregivers? What's your view?
Do you mean is more caregivers coming through, or
Are the caregivers becoming more empowered and educated?
Yeah, so we have two systems running. We have our whole premise is to patients self-manage, or to let carers self-manage with the patients. So we do have two different ways people could come in. People come in either as carers and they get supported with relatives and stuff living with cancer, or they come in as themselves and they get supported to self-manage themselves going forwards. So yeah, I think that is a big area to look at as well.
Stephanie, you are not at the beginning nor at the end of your journey. Tell us where you are and where you think you're going to be going, and why did you both enter the specialty, and what are your views on it now?
My interest in oncology was from a medical school point of view. I think I was really quite struck by the fact that it was one of the few specialties where there was so many unanswered questions and so many whys and whats and where we were going. And then I did an elective as a medical student in Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. And at the time, this was many years ago, 2002, I was struck, having spent time with a surgical team at Bristol, where I was a medical student, how different the care was in New York in this cancer center. What at the time seemed to me like the future innovation, that there was so much that they were doing that we weren't doing. And so it very much was I had an intellectual curiosity. I thought cancer there was a future there, and there was so much we didn't know, and so much scope for improving patients' lives. And so I chose to do cancer and women's health. And at the moment I work as a surgeon within a big multidisciplinary team. I'm at the end of my training, but I think that it's when you are very aware of possibilities of what could be, and because there is so much going on in the world of cancer and innovation, it's really, if you want to be at the table where the future is brought to the present, where you know the patients are getting the best possible outcomes as quickly as they can, then there is so much outside of the walls of a hospital you can do to make sure the patients at least are aware of the possibilities and are able to connect better with healthcare systems to do everything they can to improve their outcomes. And so that's where I am. I think I spend a lot of time trying to look at healthcare, especially oncology, which is what I do at the moment, looking at it from the patient's point of view. If that were my mother or my sister, what would I want to know? How do they infiltrate the system and understand, and how do they really know what their best options are? And so that's where my interests are. How do we empower the patient to make sure they're there, they get the best choices and they get the best outcomes? And I think doctors are well placed to go out of hospital systems and into the world and given the knowledge and understanding and helping to drive this sort of innovation and communication into improving outcomes.
Well, as if by magic, you have almost perfectly segued into the next question. You talk about the US versus the UK as one of the things that you notice a difference in, and you also talk about the need for innovating in order to give people greater access and so forth. What do you think are the key inequalities in cancer care, both in terms of what you may be offered internationally and also just, for people that might live next door to each other, but just so happen to stumble across a different consultant or a different catchment area for a particular trial or so on. I'm actually going to start by asking this question to Vernon, who has been around the world a lot. You've obviously seen the sorts of things that are launched in different countries at different times. I thought that might be an interesting way to start this inequality question, and what things might be done in order to bridge some of those gaps.
One of the things that strikes me most is that there are such fantastic examples of great practice, of good work around in different environments that are just hidden, that nobody knows about. And in fact, what we see, you used the example in the US and how you went there in 2002, and it's exciting. I would think you probably felt it was this hugely exciting, interesting, vibrant place. Health inequality in the US is worse than, it's getting worse, in fact, for certain groups. Health literacy is getting worse for certain groups. So we have the democratization through web and online and digital media, access to information, access to channels are there, information is there, evidence is there, and in fact I'm going to go back to Andy in a bit later maybe, and we'll talk about the challenge of how too much evidence and not the right evidence, not right types of evidence. But so what I see is massive opportunities, but I see at the same time this discrepancy in how they're applied, where they're applied, and who they're applied for. And how do we democratize that access to those choices to empower people to navigate what's most valuable for them, what's best practice, and how is that? How do we do that to an N of 1? So we're not treating populations. We've got to keep thinking about what's most valuable to an individual at whatever stage of disease, type of disease, or family situation they are, and that requires a personalisation. It requires it's a two-way dialogue. It's a dialogue. It's not just about pushing information around. So that's what I see are huge opportunities, but also I think the traditional models of education, information transfer, are failing to achieve their potential.
Does the table feel that that communication is a part of the solution, or are there sort of some more fundamental? I mean, what I'm trying to get at is there are clearly different things that are being developed in different places. Whether it's very smart AI for radiology being pursued not by oncologists but in fact by computer scientists, through to marvelous work in immunotherapy. I know, Andy, you've been involved in some of the earliest immunotherapy work, and obviously you saw various things at Sloan Kettering. Fundamentally, as we get better and better at doing more sophisticated stuff, are we actually creating equity and access, or are we just creating sort of a few people having access to some marvelous things? And is communication a part of solving that? Andy, what are your thoughts?
I think it is. I mean, look, there are a number of factors at play here. I think one thing to say, certainly in the UK or in any socialised medicine system, there's a finite pot of money. We all know this. There's only so much you can do with that. And that inevitably leads to rationing. And that, probably more than any other factor at the moment, limits, certainly in the United Kingdom, patients' access to care. There's a little bit of a postcode lottery going on there as well. So, that's more of a political point than a communication point. How we solve that, well, that's been going on for years. We can talk about patient communication, but also communication from the oncologist, because I think there's a real attitude issue here as well, in that there are those who are very keen to adopt technologies early and bring those technologies in for their patients as soon as possible. And then there are maybe the more conservative oncologists who really, I'm not doing anything until there's a randomized phase 3 trial. So you've got, somebody who is seen as an innovator to some people will be looked at as a maverick. Could be looked at as a maverick by others. And so it's very, very difficult. If you're kind of right there at the forefront and you're pushing too hard, some will see you as a maverick, others will see you as an innovator, but that's a challenge. And then from the patient perspective, there are, certainly in the UK and everywhere else, there are socio-economic factors, and you alluded to this, Vernon, and healthcare outcomes are completely different. Even if you just look within London, you know, you take the outcomes in Chelsea, completely different from the outcomes in Woolwich or Lewisham. And there are various factors at play. So, I mean, these are things that are extremely challenging to move forward. Certainly, I think that the web, the internet, is a bit of a leveler in a way, in that it's giving everybody equal access, but it's then, for some, information overload. And how do we filter that and make sure that what people are reading and what are they actually understanding, and is it relevant to the question that they're trying to ask? So there are so many challenges, and I've just highlighted a few there, and I'm sure there are lots of others as well. How you bring it all together, I think, well, that's ultimately the job of the oncologist, but it makes our job a lot more challenging, a lot more time-consuming as well, and we're treating ever more patients in ever, shorter periods of time. That's getting very difficult to do. So,
Shamil, you're working at really the cutting edge of data science, AI, machine learning, and understanding systems biology. Cancer is a complex systems biology problem. Do you think that the future oncologist is more like a data scientist?
There's two extremes that you can get. One is where you've got very homogeneous, systematic data for radiology scans, scanning data, and there machine learning is very good at what's called narrow AI, very good at classification, and we've had some amazing results on diagnosing various types of cancer. But that's typically not the kind of job an oncologist or a radiologist would be doing. We don't yet have artificial general intelligence. The ability to say, oh, that. Actually, we're not talking about breast cancer. We're talking about something else. So, on the other end, we've got N=1 individualized treatment, where you don't have 100,000 scans. You've got one patient and one set of genetics and one set of specifics, and there again. How do we use that kind of, how do we use data to help that case? And somewhere in the middle, you've got sort of randomized controlled trials. Now, the thing is that we can't, we understanding the sort of the coal face, oncologists, can't sort of wait around, for there to be, perfect gold standard randomized controlled trials. We need to find a way of dealing with limited data and personalization. Now, I think there can be ways. We've talked about, you mentioned adaptive trials, and I think that's a way where we can sort of start thinking about, instead of having kind of, just a standard approach, what happens if we have algorithms that we're trying to test? Where, depending on the outcomes, the pathways are changed along the way. And actually, you can get surprising amounts of power out of that. It's tricky, and we'd love to have infinite resources to do randomized control trials on everything. But in the case where we're going down not 100,000 scans, but N=1, we're going to have to figure out how to get some sort of evidence-based algorithms going, or treatment plans, and I think that there sort of some good data analysis is going to help. So it can help from the individual to the many.
And I mean, my feeling and sense of it is that cancer is becoming more and more deeply understood as a molecular problem versus just a thing that you see in some part of your body that requires surgery and radiotherapy and then some systemic cytotoxic therapy. And of course, you know, we are seeing a huge revolution potentially occurring in the use of the immune system rather than the sort of management of compromising the immune system as part of cancer care. But it does strike me that it's becoming more and more difficult for a single human brain to really understand all of the different pathways that have gone wrong, how they interact. I mean, it's certainly beyond me when I look at a genetic, you know, sort of genomic map of different pathways and find out there are actually not two things I could be doing, but maybe 450 at the same time. And that seems to be almost like beyond human understanding. So if computers come along and help with the interpretation of the complex molecular problem, is that going to be something that helps us sort of reproduce Andy's and his very kind of, as you say, maverick or forward-thinking, whichever view you wish to have of Andy, but does that help us replicate an Andy, or does it just make it that someone who receives that information is scared by it? You know, I mean, that's an interesting one for me, and I'm going to ask you that, Shamil, and then I'm also actually going to ask Ben, who's relatively new to the communications world, as to how he thinks his clients would react if they had to try and publish not randomized controlled trial results, but something completely different.
I mean, I think the kind of complex system that you're talking about should be viewed as a tool for clinicians rather than a substitute. You're absolutely right that when you get highly complex, interacting, nonlinear feedback systems with, you know, thousands of molecular mechanisms interacting, it is really difficult for any individual humans, but it's also difficult in fact to model, because you get a sensitive dependence on initial conditions. You actually get these models that you know, can be unstable, but on the other hand, they can help, because they can help figure out unintended consequences of second-order reactions and things like that. And so I think that, you know, actually the way to look at this is not sort of confront patients, but for it really to be something to arm clinicians to actually think through these difficult treatment plans and personalized plans, which would be very difficult in general, but can be, one can go down the route of personalizing with this kind of technology in one's back pocket.
So in fact, it's almost like the algorithm is more the medicine than the new medicines potentially. But so Ben, you know, you've had some experience working with some of the most forward-thinking biopharma companies recently. What is your view? How do you think the industry might react to this ever more complex world where you know, it's not just one or two treatment options, but maybe it's several?
I think I'll pick up on the point that was just raised to help me answer that question, because I think there's a synergy between the two things. I think that the point that you yourself have just raised is an incredibly valid one. We often jump to the technology as the solution. You mentioned it before, Andy, the internet. I grew up with the internet, and for me, the internet, it's not a revolution. It's just always been there. You know, it sounds silly, but it's true. For me, it's always been there. And these things, these tools, these new ways of analysing things are simply just tools that increase our ability to perform things we've always done. It was Steve Jobs who said the computer is a bicycle for the mind. It's just a tool that improves us. It's not the solution in and of itself. It just allows us to do things maybe at the speed to keep up with the advances that are happening quicker and quicker and quicker. We just need to use these tools to our advantage to make sure that we're able to keep up with it. The thing that actually happens on the ground, that kind of those little bits of chemistry that happen between a healthcare professional and a patient, are still there, and that's still the medicine. That's still what helps. That's still what makes a patient better. But the ability of tools that are now available, like the internet, like mobile technology, to facilitate that communication so someone can find out about something, to have that conversation. The value of the tools is in giving them that knowledge to be able to be in a position to have that conversation. So the first point I would make around that is that we mustn't get fixated on the kind of technology being the solution. It's merely a means to an end. And I think that that would bring me on to answer your question, Jack, which was about the reaction of the pharma industry, the biopharma industry, to this new paradigm of adaptive trials. And, you know, we're talking about X, Y, and Z treatments being used one after the other rather than company X's products. And that, of course, raises a whole can of worms in terms of how that's approached from a number of different perspectives. From a regulatory perspective, the regulatory frameworks we have at the moment are completely inappropriate to manage a problem like that. How does a company make claims around a product and defend those claims from a rebuttal from another company when they are maybe using both products together in combination, one after the other in sequence? You know, I don't know how we're going to solve that problem. I think what needs to happen, having been in the healthcare communications industry for a couple of years now, I think that what needs to happen is that we need to completely change our approach. And I think that needs to happen from the ground up. And the way that I think the way that we do that is through communicating. And I think that the pharma industry will never change unless there's a need for it to change. And that change will only be driven by the people delivering the care on the ground, and that will come from the patients. It will come from the doctors. It will come from the nurses. It will come from allied health professionals like dietitians. It will come from the carers, and it will come from the people around that kind of circle who support that interaction. And if there is that need, and if there is that desire for things to be different, then the pharma companies will answer. Unless that happens, unless that movement happens from the ground up, we won't see a change. But I believe now we're in a situation where we have these new tools that are available, the internet, mobile technology, that there will be a kind of an uprising, if you like, where people will no longer accept what's given to them, and people will no longer accept the status quo, and people will start demanding different. And once they start doing that, people will start acting differently, and doctors will start treating differently, and doctors will start giving treatment X and treatment Y and treatment Z, regardless of what the license says, you know. And once that starts to happen, then the pharma industry will be the ones to react to that. And I think that movement needs to happen from the ground up. And I think the way we solve that is through recognising the new tools that are available to facilitate communication.
That's very interesting.
Can I just add to that, Jack?
Of course, absolutely.
Is that all right? Just and like any good politician, I'm going to answer a question with a question.
Oh gosh.
And that question is this: if all tumours are different, why do we treat them all the same way? And that's what's happening day in, day out, week in, week out. If you have breast cancer, you get treatment A and B. If you have bowel cancer, you get treatment C and D. And there's got to be a paradigm shift. You alluded to it, Ben. This hasn't just got to happen at the level of the oncologist. It's got to happen much more at the kind of political and regulatory level, because at the moment you get a drug license based upon a specific disease. Drug X is licensed for breast cancer. But every cancer is unique, and we've got to move towards a model whereby we're giving mutation-specific treatment rather than site-specific treatment. That requires a paradigm shift, and it requires probably legal changes as well worldwide. And I don't really, I mean that is incredibly complex. And we have the first immunotherapy drug now licensed for a specific gene defect. And these are the checkpoint inhibitors for microsatellite unstable tumours. It's the first time it's happened. The FDA did this last year. So that watershed is breaking through, and that's got to happen more and more for us to be able to deliver truly personalised care.
So I remember that, you know, the International Classification of Disease, ICD, I believe when ICD-1 was first compiled, there were two types of cancer. There was, I think it was a lung cancer and all other cancers. I think those were the two classifications of cancer. I think there are lots more now at ICD-10-11, but what will ICD-12 look like? You know, that's another thing which is very intriguing to me, is the fact that you mention that if someone says, I've got cancer, the next question is what kind? And they will say breast or prostate. But actually, it's in fact an extraordinarily sophisticated, usually highly convoluted problem with lots and lots of issues going on, both in the tumour, genetically, in the mitochondria, metabolically, in the microenvironment, with inflammatory things, and of course the immune system. And you know, how do we go about describing that? Breast is a really easy thing as the next answer. What if the next answer is not breast, but it's a very, very long code which describes all of the different things that need to be addressed? That surely is one of the biggest changes that, I mean, it's not only a change for oncology, it's a change for absolutely everyone. How do we go about doing that?
Change for society as a whole, isn't it? I mean, I think that you will be able to talk to this far better than me, Shamil, but you're looking at fractal-like complexity. You know, the closer you look, the more complex the situation becomes. So we've now reached this situation where, you know, the research tells us that every tumour is different, and they are mutationally distinct, and they have a unique genetic profile. But that doesn't yet exist as a meme within society. You know, people talk in terms of having breast cancer or bowel cancer because there's something they attach to having that condition. You say breast cancer to someone, you know, you think of a certain image in your head. You say lung cancer to someone, they think of another image in their head. And that acceptance of my cancer is genomically different to everyone else's no longer, you know, it doesn't exist as a thing yet within society. People don't even think of that. And it also doesn't exist in the minds of clinicians. I think they're probably a degree ahead, but I think we're probably on the cusp of, you know, you said earlier, Jack, we're on the cusp of a revolution. I think we are, at least in clinicians' minds. We're probably at the cusp of, you know, it's breast cancer, but it's this type, and you have this type. I think we're at the cusp of people saying, you know, forget this. This is ridiculous. We're going to talk about mutational. And once they start to do that with one type of tumour, the whole thing will fall to bits, and then it will be built back up again in the next meme. And then in 15 years' time, the next thing will come along, and it will be broken back down again, and it will be built back up in the next thing. And that will happen with clinicians. It will happen with patients. It will happen with the media. It will happen with politicians. And it will happen at different points in time. And if we really want to move towards personalised care, and we do want to make that the standard of care where people are treated on an N of 1 basis, then it's imperative that we have the solutions that we can offer people now, that we fast forward that process as fast as possible. Because unless we do that, then people won't want these things.
Is the mood there?
I think it's interesting because I do to some extent think that clinicians are really very aware. I think we know that we look at cancer, and the way we treat cancer is a very almost high-level detail. Not all cancers are different, but lots of cancers have a lot of similarities. And as far as we can, given the resources that we have, we will treat X amount of cancers quite well. We will treat, you know, Y amount of cancers really badly, and some people do really, really badly because it's about tumor biology, which our generic, high-level, detailed knowledge just doesn't do anything for them. You know, clinicians are aware that personalised medicine needs more time, it needs more resources, that tumor biology is everything, where we look to things in groups, and it's easy to put things in groups, and that's what clinical trials do. You're looking at large groups of people who aren't really the same, and then you alter your statistics to show how, well, if some of these people were exactly the same, you know, adjusting for these variables, then actually this works. But actually that's the way we choose to look at the data, and that's the way we choose to look at how best we can get the best outcomes for most people given the available treatments.
And resources even to diagnose them, I would imagine.
Totally,
too.
And the question of inequalities, I think the health inequalities are the same everywhere. in different forms, whether you're in a small cancer unit in Uganda or you're in Sloan Kettering, you can get different healthcare outcomes within the same system, because the challenges are still the same: access, costs, silos, the social determinants of health. All those things have to be, in a way, prioritized against, reducing costs and investing in technologies. Of course, if I had cancer tomorrow, I would very much want my outcomes to be augmented by an artificial intelligence system that looks at my genomics and, the eye knife that the surgeon, when he takes out my tumour, does the mass spectrometry and gives me more details about what else should be done while I'm open before the oncologist then gives me the chemo plus the immunotherapy. But of course, in reality, we're not there, because the basic things like the patient getting enough time with the doctor to get the information to process the options and make the best decision, the doctor having enough time to be able to do exactly what they feel they can, whether it's a surgeon when you're debulking tumours, or the oncologist who has nice approved drugs and that's all they have to hand, whether it's a cancer drugs fund that helps along the way because there's a new drug. I think there's so much more that needs to be addressed outside of innovation. As you say, it's not about the innovation of technology, it's about outcomes. It's about outcomes that matter to patients. But of course, the whole point of innovation is that you don't have to do something new, you don't have to have a new tool, but you can find new ways of making sure that, the patient gets the best available treatment in the right place, at the right time, as quickly as possible. And that will come still with every healthcare system, whether you're at the Royal Marsden, which has got very high standards of care, to you can get patients having differing outcomes within the same available treatments because of tumour biology, because of communication, because of resources, because of the time of day they had their surgery or the oncologist that they saw. So there is, I think there's a lot more than the future. It's how we prioritise the challenges ahead to make sure that we are able to putting new treatments and drugs and innovation up there among the things that are necessary to get the best outcomes.
Time you mentioned, which was an interesting one. So, we live in a very time-constrained world, and it strikes me that whilst a patient or their loved ones will suddenly mobilise thousands of hours of time to research exactly what's going on, might actually have the resources potentially to do ever cheaper, deeper tumour sequencing, if they can get hold of their tumour, of course, in the myriad of places now that are offering kind of the ability to gain a deeper molecular understanding of things. But it does strike me from your comments that we don't have an awful lot of time. I'm actually going to put this to Holly. I suppose one of your roles is to actually provide people with your time, and what is your impression of this ever more sophisticated world? Do you get a feeling from your patients that they are being explained everything, that all the communication is there, that everyone is fully understood? And do you have to fill in gaps yourself?
I think there's, if you look at talking to patients, there's a specific time when patients are going to be more open to what they're being told. If you've suddenly got diagnosed with something, and your oncologist goes, right, this is the treatment plan, this is what we're going to do, you've got this option or that option, they're still very much in the shock phase. And I think they go, okay, whatever you think is best. There's a lot of trust put from most people, into their doctors, as there should be. And they go along and they have their treatment, they have their choices. They don't really have a choice, they have whatever they're kind of been told to do because that's what they believe in, they believe in their doctors. They have it all, they come out the other side and they go, what have I just had done? They have no idea. And that's because the time when it was communicated to them and the time that was given to communicating it to them, they weren't open to receiving that communication. I do think that is a big part of it. And I think that's partly why at the end they kind of break, because they're like, they can't really understand quite what has happened to them. I'm very lucky. I get a lot of time with my patients compared to doctors. I get a lot more time to spend with them one-on-one, especially in a cancer rehab service, maybe not so much in an acute setting. And we do have time to kind of try, as best as I can, on a kind of layman's kind of scale, kind of explain it to them. I think what I was going to add in, though, is, you know, we do want a patient to be N=1. Patients quite like being grouped. They quite like having that, I'm a breast cancer survivor, or I've had breast cancer. And part of our group sessions, we do that whole, you know, support network is really important to them. Or, you know, I've had bowel cancer, and, you know, we see it happening over the days when we have our, you know, sessions to help people out. That say over lunchtime, they all group together and they talk about their stories, talk about how they're coping with the symptoms post their treatments. And I think to a patient, for some, that is really important, being grouped. It sounds a bit, you know, we as clinicians might want to make it very individualised care, and it should be. But for a patient, that support network post-it is really important to them. And I think that's something we perhaps shouldn't forget going forward, that they still like a simple term about what's happened to them.
I suppose especially if surgery, for instance, or radiotherapy is directed towards a certain part of your body, and the changes that happen as a result do kind of cause a change in identity of that part of your body that's been addressed.
Exactly.
Andy, you spend an extraordinary amount of time both in your NHS work, but also you really are quite well known for going above and beyond the call of duty. In terms of time, what could be done to improve the amount of information that you can give to a patient? Obviously, you can't create time and you can't clone yourself, at least not yet. But what in your view would be an ideal situation, an ideal consultation in today's ever more complex sort of oncology options world?
It's a huge issue because we're being squeezed at both ends. I'm having to see more patients year on year. Treatments are getting more complex, so I need more time year on year. My clinic tomorrow, I've got 61 patients booked. 61 patients.
Is this in
across the team?
Right.
I'll probably see 20 myself. The other 40 will be seen by the rest of the team. So, okay, across 7-8 hour clinic, I'll see 20 patients. That's roughly 20 minutes a case.
Is that enough?
No, it's not enough. What can I get through in 20 minutes? You know, 5 or 10 minutes of that is reading the case notes and dictating letter and filling out forms. So I've maybe got 10 minutes to talk to a patient. It's a conveyor belt. It's a very, very difficult situation, and it's getting harder and harder all the time. So, I mean, manpower is part of it. We have too few doctors working in the system. That's certainly part of it. But I think we need more intelligent solutions, and this is where I think the AI is going to come in terms of sifting and filter. It's about filtering the information, analysing the patient data on an individual basis. This is where we're going to head towards. You know, it's, as I said, mutation specific. Every cancer has a unique genetic fingerprint. We need to feed that into the system. And I mean, there's so many other data points that need to go into the system as well. You've got the socioeconomic factors. We've got the religious factors, the patients' attitudes, doctors' attitudes, regulatory frameworks. We've got, you know, protocols that we have to work within at the moment. There are so many factors, and actually, you know, when a patient's coming in, all that's going through your head, and then you sort of come out with an answer, and you've got 10 minutes to deliver that, and it's exhausting. It's really exhausting. But so I think it's manpower number one, and AI, and how we bring that in. I think it's going to be really challenging. I'm interested for your views on that. But no easy answer.
Can I pick up on that? Because it reminds me of a couple of things. We're talking about efficiency and time. So 2 years ago at ASCO, so this is American Clinical Oncology, biggest oncology conference in the world. There's a couple of points I make. One is it takes on average, 15 years or something for data that's presented at a congress to go from congress to clinic is one thing, about that dissemination piece. I think
drug
we
development
need
takes a long time, yeah.
Yeah, but we need to address that evidence gathering piece. But there was hidden away in a side room. So there's all the big, all the big treatment data releases, and hidden away in a side room was a digital innovation piece, and it was for late stage patients with lung cancer, and it was a really simple tool. It was a web-based tool for capturing their symptoms, signs, everything from mental health to signs, symptoms, the lot. And the back end, it had an AI that learned to look at your signs and your symptoms and to see whether earlier intervention was needed or whether you were ticking along and it could leave you be. They compared standards of care versus this platform plus standards of care. And there was a 7-month overall survival difference. So, in summary, listening to patients, to your point about when they're able to express themselves in the right way and to capture these things, just simply listening to patients and intervening earlier, using some AI behind, there was a 7-month survival difference. And this also talks about resource allocation. So there was a huge saving in reducing your inputs where they weren't needed. So it was much smarter allocation of resource, much smarter allocation of intervention, and the outcomes spoke for themselves. And that was the only difference between the two arms. Incredible. But something like that is readily scalable.
Yeah. And that, I presume, this is was this Move Care?
It is Move Care.
In the Move Care, and this it's essentially a digital platform without AI. It's your patients report symptoms, and it's an algorithm that then looks at the most significant symptoms. And of course, something like that in an NHS clinic, while the patient's waiting, they can put things in. You can look at what I think that the data showed was that also that one, we can't see patients as often as we'd like. So for cancer follow-up, a lot of NHS trusts are looking at, well, really, what is the evidence, and do we need to see patients every 3 months? So even spacing out follow-up for cancer care, because there are no resources, there are no doctors, the clinics are overbooked. And again, this tool, which made a difference, which would probably be useful in a really busy clinic with not very many doctors, just not in terms of just follow-up and making things easier for doctors, but also the fact that they're patient-reported symptoms. So, and they are regularly collected, and it's easy to then pick up on red flag symptoms. That in itself just takes digitizing the healthcare system, having the infrastructure for not what is sort of quite expensive, still very much research level, complicated stuff like artificial intelligence, but this is digitizing. This
making
is
communication.
Just making communication tools, simple tools, like making the communication tools within our systems, within patients being, not necessarily just in the hospital, but also ambulatory, that we have tools to make sure that we can keep collecting data. That in itself is about investing. It's about investing in what is important and how we go at all levels, as you said, Ben, from policy to government regulation, say that actually these little things might take a bit more investment, but they are important and overall might save costs.
Not necessarily a small thing if you can do the equivalent of a super blockbuster drug just with some communication technology. One of the things which is obviously changing hugely in oncology, while we are getting a deeper molecular understanding of tumour and tumour biology, it's also obviously this big revolution, or the promise of revolution, we could say, in the world of harnessing the immune system, which adds another level of optionality and complexity. I don't think that we even vaguely understand how it is that some of these immunotherapies are really working, but maybe we will be able to again molecularly profile the immune system to add another layer of complexity to it. But one of the things which obviously people are hearing about a lot, they constantly, just as a person, not as an oncologist, but as somebody who speaks the language of medicine, it's something that I'm frequently asked, is what about immunotherapy? And obviously it's a huge thing, and it's very, very different to what oncologists used to do. Andy, you've had some experience of that. Is there a new language that we need to speak in order to explain this? Are there specific things that people misunderstand about it? And what do you think we need to do to make those misunderstandings clearer?
I mean, the immune system is vastly complex. I don't even begin to try. I'm no immunologist. I don't even begin to try and understand it. There are, we're really just, immunotherapy is still very much at its infancy, even though it's actually been around for 100 years. You know, when we used to inject, 100 years toxins into, Coley's toxins, remember that? Sort of,
well, I wasn't around 100 years ago, but thank you for thinking. I look quite good
in
for
a previous
that.
Previous life. But the concept of harnessing the immune system to fight cancer has been around for an awful long time. And it's really only recently, with our understanding of the molecular basis of the immune system, that we've been able to develop these targeted therapies. And even there, we look at the most clever treatments that we've got now, checkpoint inhibitors. And maybe melanoma aside, you're looking at response rates which by and large are still under 50%. So the best chemotherapies have response rates similar. So we've got an awful long way to go. And again, it sort of comes down to individualization. But immunotherapy, it's certainly the future. It's not a replacement for systemic therapy, for chemotherapy. It's something that I see working maybe more as a maintenance treatment. After you've had your primary treatment, you get onto your immunotherapy to restore equilibrium. It's all about equilibrium. We have you have a situation where the immune system is surveying for cancer cells, eliminating cancer cells. The cancer cells then develop the ability to escape detection by the immune system. And what these treatments do, or what we hope they will do, is to restore that equilibrium. And sort of enhance the immune surveillance against cancer. But it's extremely complex. Most of us oncologists are very simple folk, and we don't understand the molecular complexities of the immune system. And it's just not really known yet how we're going to best integrate these treatments. And again, even within immunotherapy, we're still seeing tumour site-specific treatment. And I think that's, I sort of come back to the same point, but that's a huge issue. Melanoma is probably the case in point. I think that's slightly different because they're incredibly immunologically active. These are tumours that are extremely active to immunotherapy, and we have the best rates of response in melanoma. But I think until we can really get away from this tumour site-specific treatment. And you mentioned, we've talked about genetic profiling. We need to immunoprofile the patients as well.
That's another level of learning and re-education.
And it's again another, there's this, other concept of big data. I mean, the amount of data potentially for each patient that we can collect. And if you then have patients collecting their own information in the community, collecting temperature data, blood pressure data, it all feeding. I mean, the amount of data is enormous. I don't know how we deal with that.
Well, you won't be able to see 20 patients a day, Andy, clearly.
Absolutely. I won't see one a day.
But perhaps maybe with a bot that can help explain to the patient in advance what's going on, potentially, we shall maybe see. I wanted to just move on a little bit into the concept of thinking of the patient holistically and what their goals and wishes are. Obviously, the goals and wishes of science and oncology is to get an overall survival or so on. But are people's own wishes being communicated properly? Do we have a choice, really, when we go into the oncology clinic? Do we truly have, with all these wonderful things going on, do we truly have a choice as a patient to decide whether we balance out toxicity with preserving our immune system or with quality of life versus overall survival? Is it something that's widening in choice, or with all of these options and deeper molecular profiling or immunoprofiling in future and so on, are those choices actually being narrowed? What do you think? An open question to everybody. We all have presumably had experiences either with patients or with friends and family and so on.
If I can jump in on that one. We've talked a lot about increasing complexity, and what does complexity and options, what does it do? It creates anxiety and creates uncertainty. So this going back to, so there's this molecular profiling and everybody having an immunogram and all of those, all of those things is fine. But if we are in a state where we're moving towards longer term, higher quality survival, that requires us to fully understand what higher quality means for the person and for the patient and their carers, whoever, to be able to talk about that in a meaningful way and understand what does it mean to offset a different adverse event profile from immunotherapy versus whatever option it might be. So, which comes back to people's values and about their choices, and it's not just going along and having your one option or 2 or 3 options of treatments. It's about what those treatment and interventions, what the implications are, what the impact is to you as a person, and really empowered to make informed choices. Informed choice is a really interesting one in this, in a more complex environment.
I think. Sorry, jump in. I think that's really true. I mean, I think the phrase I most often hear in that kind of survivorship stage was, "If I had known." And I think they did know. I think they were told of the outcome of what was going to happen to them. But I hear over and over again, "If I had known, I wouldn't have done it," or "If I had known this was going to be," and I think you'll tell them the outcomes, you'll tell them what the situation could be, the worst case scenario of the treatment, the best case scenario of a treatment. But again, you're not applying it to yourself. And when they're in that position and they can, for example, you've had head and neck cancer, you've had tongue removed, they can't talk, they can't go back to work. If I had known, I wouldn't have wanted to do it. And I think when you get told you've got cancer, people instantly still do think, "I'm going to die. I just want to survive." And you go into survival mode. And they go, "Okay, whatever you need to do to me, do it to me." And then they've survived, and they come to surviving, and that's literally what they're doing. They're no longer living. And I do think that again, it comes to time and to communicating those options in clinic, and you guys, I just don't know how you do it. You haven't got the time to do that necessarily. But I do think exactly when you're talking about AI and stuff, great, we can pull out a load of different options for treatment. But what does that treatment mean to that patient in the end?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is that going to mean for them living for, 10, 20, 30 years? We're not looking at short-term survival anymore. We are looking at a lifetime of survival. And that is something we're really going to have to think about.
Yeah.
When things get more complicated, I don't know what you guys think as doctors.
I agree with you. Well, I mean, I agree with you. I think as things get more complicated, it's going to become even more important to do what patients want. Which sounds like a stupid thing to say, but we must stop assuming that we know what patients want. And when your patient gets the diagnosis, goes into a state of shock, are they really making an informed decision? Really? Yeah. If someone tells them, these are what the options are, okay, I'll go do whatever you want, like you say, do whatever you want to me. You really do have to question how informed that decision is that they're making. And I think that, as the options get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger exponentially, we must stop thinking that we know what patients want best. And we're seeing this already in trials of patient-reported outcomes and being patient-centric. What does that mean? It's about measuring. Are we providing for patients what they want to happen to them? And I would argue, if you're not doing that, you're not doing anything at all. There's no point practically killing your patient when. So in my line of work, when their mental health's in shreds on the floor, what's the point? Mm-hmm. You've made them worse.
It's that continuing change as well, isn't it, in a patient? They come in as one person, and as the treatment continues, you're changing. And I think that needs to be assessed as the treatment happens. So, we do holistic needs assessments now. I don't know, I'm guessing doctors maybe do them in clinic as well, where you ask the patient how they're doing, what their symptoms are, continuously going through it. And adapting the care kind of at that time to how they're changing. For example, you're right, if their mental health is in shatters or physically they're just not coping, is changing the plan, and you guys do that. But I think it's going to be more and more important going forwards to really consider that personally.
And as the outcomes get better, as someone can live for that much longer, it becomes that more important as well.
Yeah, as long as they're living.
Yeah.
Living and surviving.
I think that's a big thing.
What we often say to patients now, or what I often say to patients in the clinic, is you're not dying of cancer, you're living with cancer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's a very subtle difference, but it's so important. so important. And just to come back as well to the kind of information overload, we've talked about time, but actually, if you analyse a consultation, patients actually don't take in most of what is said to them in a consultation. So again, there's another dichotomy there. They'll often take in the first. So I will always say the most important thing first, and then at the very end of the consultation, I'll just reiterate that. But a lot of what goes on in the middle, especially if you're giving them very complex data, they often won't take it in, and then they'll say, "Oh, whatever you want, doc. You decide what treatment I'm going to have." And then you've got the whole kind of quality of life versus quantity issue as well. It's mind-boggling.
There's an interesting disconnect on the back of that, though, isn't there? So, because we were doing some work looking at what health technology assessments, so assessing new medicines, innovative medicines, right? So we've had these assessment frameworks, the way we measure drugs, their effectiveness versus their tolerability. We've had these frameworks for a long time, right? But and that's part and parcel of the problem. They need to be updated and changed, but we haven't got better solutions yet. But it needs patients and clinicians and the researchers. And when we come into long-term survival, it's all about quality, you know.
Well, it's actually quite a contemporary subject at the moment, given what is happening with the UK government-led brain cancer mission, for instance, given that adult glioblastoma is one of the most difficult diseases and poorest prognoses in cancer, and the kind of shift towards what patients want and access to new ways of helping patients make those decisions in conjunction with oncology, because traditional approaches have for 50 years or so not produced particularly different outcomes, and so that's an extremely interesting, new development really that we haven't seen before in cancer, starting with glioblastoma. So that is news to watch, I think, as we see this evolve. But also in that comes a very, very different communication of outcomes, because if it's not overall survival or the survival advantage of drug X versus drug Y, then you get into what is the quality of life area under the curve for combination X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F versus another very complex combination. And that has issues as far as communicating the science and the value. And then if you've got 5 drug companies providing a very different cocktail to another 5 drug companies providing a very different cocktail to somebody else, who do you assign the value to? Who's producing the toxicity? Who's producing the efficacy? Who's producing the quality of life? Who's producing the overall survival? It's a big, big challenge, which I know, Shamil, you've been thinking about a little bit yourself in your work overall. I mean, are there any thoughts about how a very patient, this is really I know everyone, we've been very patient with me asking all of these questions, and thank you, but sort of final question really to everybody is, how can we truly move towards a much more patient-centric, personalised, adaptive and choice-driven model in an economy and an industry that really is not built for that? Shamil, do you want to start with your thoughts?
I see actually 2 areas that need to be supplemented, because we've got scarcity in terms of funding, we've got the difficulty of personalizing medicine. And so the 2 crunch points come in using technology, for example, to potentiate the oncologist, because you get 20 minutes out of which 10 or 8 minutes is actually kind of with the patient. What we need to be able to do is potentiate the oncologist to so that a lot of the processing, ordering of tests and classification and a lot of the interaction, working out all the symptoms from patients, but then also we've been talking about patient, and it seems to me that actually the patient needs potentiating. I mean, after all, making an informed decision is a very difficult thing. We all, we have the concept of patient advocates, but that clearly needs to be supplemented as we go into more complex treatments and more difficult pathways. So I think there are these two areas. Actually, we should think about it on both sides, because we've got scarcity of resource on both sides. Patients are compromised in terms of their ability to really follow this stuff, especially with this difficult, kind of emotionally challenging times, but also that they're not practitioners. And so to navigate these things that even clinicians find difficult to weigh up becomes very difficult. So I think, supplementing on both sides. This is the basic idea is everyone thinks of AI as sort of, substituting or whatever, but I think the word is, tools, potentiating.
I think we should do a round of wrapping up slowly on this subject. So final thoughts from all of you on this subject of, as Shamil was saying, is, how can we use the tools, the technology, the communication to potentiate the oncologist, potentiate the patient, personalise and make for a much more effective clinically, but also patient-centric, patient choice-driven world of oncology. Stephanie, your final thoughts on that?
Two things. I think providing the information to patients better in a way that they can understand, so they can be involved in choosing the personalisation of their care with whatever options we have to hand and whatever the available resources. And the second thing, I think, for healthcare systems and is measuring the outcomes that matter to patients. Measuring the outcomes that matter to patients and looking at that, and then with a patient-centered view, then prioritising how we invest in tools and technologies that will help.
Thank you. Ben, I'm going to zigzag.
Sounds good to me. I mean, look, we've spoken a lot tonight about technology, and we spoke about MoveCare, producing a remarkable result with a very simple intervention. So I think the first thing I'd say is it's about doing the simple things better, really. And I think there's a vast improvement that can be done from doing the simple things better. But the other thing I'd say about that is I think MoveCare and all the advances, I think they're fabulous. I really do, honestly. But the reality is, if you introduce them into a clinic tomorrow, it would go down like a brick dropped out of the 9th floor window that we're sat next to. There's no point throwing a ball if there's no one to catch it on the other end. The patient needs to be told and educated, why is it better? Why is it better that I'm talking to a computer and not talking to a doctor? It could actually go down as a negative. Let's think about that. So there is a huge education and communication to be done around, let's just not jump to assuming that something's inevitably going to make something better, because sometimes there are barriers and there are walls that we will come up against, and it can be very, very simple measures that make those things better. And communication, in my view, is something that can break down those barriers quickly, easily, simply, to allow these brilliant innovations that are going on to actually get into patients' hands.
It's almost like having a substrate of good communication, whatever it is that we do scientifically or technologically. I would zigzag, but as we would in any good adaptive type environment, I'm going to go down to Holly.
I think the kind of thing I'd like to bring into it is, yes, we have all the technology changes or the development or the AI, but I kind of see cancer care as you go through the pathway as kind of a two-pronged approach. You've got the medical care, and then you have something called like the enhanced supportive care side of it as well. So it kind of frees up the medical care professionals to do what you guys do best, help the patient, treat the patient. Whereas you have another team, and this is kind of what we're doing in Berkshire, through the whole care pathway, who are there with their supportive care, to help them, to look at their holistic needs, to look at them from an allied health professional kind of point of view, to look at their mental health state, to look at their social economics, all that kind of stuff, their jobs, their general life as well, and kind of help them enhance that as they go through the whole pathway. So at no point do they drop, no point do they feel abandoned, so that they're constantly kept up to date, and they're constantly, you know, got other people to talk to about what just went on in the doctor's office later on. And I think that's another pathway that we kind of have to think about in care as well, and make sure we are addressing that as things do get more complicated, time gets less, and we've got more people who are living with this disease as well.
Vernon, your final thoughts?
You know, there's some brilliant examples of great work that's happening out there, whether it's in treatments, in innovation, in team approaches, or but from a communication perspective, I really quite like this idea of sort of frugal innovation. You know, we buy houses online or cars, we do things that are huge, you know, so why can't we make those sorts of communications, why can't we use those sorts of tools and services that are secure for our health needs? They already exist, right? We just need to be applying them and supporting and incentivizing people to apply them in the right way. And I think we should measure the outcomes of the communications. Replicated are done by patient organizations, commercial entities, the healthcare professionals. They're replicated. There's wastage. There's lots and lots of wastage. And actually, it's much more efficient to curate, syndicate, high quality, navigate people, and apply measurement. And we should be brutal with our analysis of not just the interventions, but the communications that go along with it.
Thank you, Vernon. Well, you know, I think it's quite right that we end with the person that always has the final word, which is the consultant oncologist. Andy, your thoughts finally on a future where we can really put patients in the driving seat and not have to build time machines for doctors.
Yeah, and I completely agree with the vast majority of what you guys have already said. Just to add to that, I would say 2 words. First word, efficiency. And that's, I think, efficiency within the healthcare system. There's still a huge amount of wastage, repetition. So wastage in time, wastage in resources. And if we could direct those resources better, it's going to become far more efficient, and we then have more to go around. That's a huge challenge. The second thing is, you know, how to solve that time problem. That time problem is not going to go away. It's actually going to get worse. So, you know, if a patient has 10 or 15 minutes in a consultation, you said it, Jack, they have hundreds of hours outside of the consultation. We have to use those hundreds of hours, and that's where the tech will come in. So that you know, they can be studying, but studying I think in a more directed way, information that we can give them rather than unfiltered information from the web, and using that time far more efficiently to understand their condition, to understand the options. So when they do come into a consultation, it's far more directed and far more efficient. So that's my piece. That's summing up piece.
So thank you very much to all of you. I mean, I found this fantastically educational, actually. I did not think that we would be coming to the crux of certain matters, which actually is about the complexity is an opportunity, but it also is up against a basic framework of not having the time to communicate in order to produce choice for people that is most appropriate to every stage of their cancer journey. We are up against it, I think, it sounds, from the profession, with the deepening complexity of understanding the disease, and just simply maybe not having enough of the time and even the information to learn about the ever-changing treatment landscape. And that we really, in order to bring, I think, some of these new choices for patients and better results ultimately as well, that we need to not only work on the science, but also on the very, very fundamental thing, which is listening to patients and educating our patients, but also as a profession, educating ourselves. So all that's left for me to say is thank you very much for your time and listening to my questions. It's been fascinating, and thank you for everybody. Appreciate it.